A truck was found abandoned on a mountain road in Oklahoma. Inside was $32,000 in cash, the family's phones, their food, their wallets, their IDs, and their dog, alive, starving, locked inside, waiting. Everything a family would take with them, everything a family would never, ever leave behind, except the family itself. Bois Jamison, his wife Sherilynn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madyson were gone. They had driven up into those mountains to look at a piece of land, and they walked away from a truck full of cash, left their own dog to starve, and vanished into the wilderness. It would be almost 4 years before anyone found them, and when they were finally found, in pieces in the woods, the answer everyone had been waiting for never came, because by then there was nothing left to tell investigators how they died or why. This is the disappearance of the Jamison family, and I'll be honest with you up front, this is one of the strangest cases I have ever sat with, because it isn't just a question of where they went. It's a tangle of disturbing little details: a starving dog, a stack of money no one touched, a strange letter, photographs, and a family that, in the weeks before they vanished, may have been coming apart from the inside. Let me take you through it carefully, because almost nothing about this one is simple.
Let me tell you who they were. Bois Dale Jamison was in his 40s. His wife, Sherilynn, was a little younger, and together they had a daughter, Madyson, a 6-year-old who everyone just called Maddie. They lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, a small town in the eastern part of the state, the kind of place surrounded by lakes and woods and quiet country. By most accounts, they were a family with their share of struggles. Bois had serious health problems, including chronic back pain, and he was on medication for it. There were financial pressures, and as we'll get to, there were tensions, some of them dark, running underneath the surface of that household. But they were also, in the simplest terms, a family. A husband, a wife, a little girl, and their dog, a sweet Australian shepherd. They had plans. In fact, the reason they drove into the mountains that day was a hopeful one. They were thinking about buying a remote piece of land, a place to put a home, a fresh start away from whatever was pressing in on them in town. That's the painful irony at the center of this. They went up into those mountains, looking for a new beginning. And not one of them ever came back down. The day was October 8th, 2009. The Jamisons loaded up their truck, a newer model GMC, and drove out toward the San Bois Mountains, a rugged, remote stretch of country near a tiny community called Red Oak. The land they wanted to see was up a rough mountain road, deep in the trees, isolated, the kind of place where the cell signal dies and the nearest neighbor is a long way off. And then, nothing. That was it. That was the last day anyone in their normal life saw or heard from Bois, Sherilynn, and Maddie Jamison. At first, there was no alarm. They were private people, dealing with their own troubles, and a few days of silence didn't immediately set off panic. But days passed, then more, and the silence started to feel wrong. Family began to worry. Questions started to be asked. Where were they? Why weren't they answering? And slowly, the search turned toward those mountains, toward that lonely road,
toward the last place they were headed. About a week after they were last seen, someone found their truck. And the moment investigators looked inside it, this stopped being a simple missing persons case and became something that has never made sense to anyone in all the years since. Here is what was in that truck: $32,000 in cash sitting in the console, just there. Stop on that for a second. A family with money troubles leaves $32,000 in cash sitting in an unlocked, abandoned vehicle out in the wilderness and walks away from it. People do not do that. Not a family under financial strain, not anybody. But it wasn't just the money. Inside that truck were the family's cell phones, Sherilynn's purse with her identification still in it, food, a GPS unit, the ordinary things you carry, all left behind. And then there was the dog. Their Australian shepherd had been locked inside that truck the entire time, for days, with no food and no water. By some miracle, the animal was still alive when the truck was found, but barely. Starving, weak, abandoned, in the one thing the family left behind. Whatever happened to Bobby, Sherilynn, and Maddie Jamison, it made them get out of that truck in a remote mountain forest and leave behind their money, their phones, their identification, and their own beloved dog to die. What does that to a person? What does that to a whole family all at once? Were they taken? Did they leave on purpose? Were they even still themselves when they stepped out of that truck? Hold those questions, because the days before they vanished only make them harder. Because the Jamison family, in the weeks leading up to that drive, had not been okay. And I want to handle this part with care, because these were real, struggling people, and it would be easy and cheap to turn their pain into a ghost story. So let me just tell you what was reported plainly. In the time before they disappeared, those close to the family described disturbing changes. There were accounts that Bobby and Sherilynn had become deeply paranoid, that they believed something was wrong in their home. There were claims, repeated in the reporting on this case, that they spoke of seeing things, spirits or figures, that they believed their house or their lives had been touched by something they couldn't explain. Sherilynn was said to have been looking into how to rid a place of evil spirits. There were reports of a so-called spell book found among their things. On the more earthly side, there was real documented conflict. Bobby was bitterly estranged from his own father. There had been threats, restraining orders, talk of feuds and danger from people around them. There was a letter, reportedly in Sherilynn's handwriting, found in connection with the case that read like the words of a person in genuine spiritual and emotional distress. So which was it? A family unraveling under mental and emotional strain? Or a family that had genuinely made dangerous enemies? Because depending on which thread you pull, this case becomes a completely different kind of tragedy.
And then there are the photographs. When investigators examined the family's camera, they found a series of images, dozens upon dozens of photos, and among the very last pictures ever taken were images of little Madyson. There is one photograph from that camera of Madyson that has stayed with everyone who's ever looked into this case. I'm not going to describe a 6-year-old girl in a way that turns her into a prop for a story. She deserves better than that. But I'll say this.
Knowing that these were among the final images of a child who would never be seen alive again gives them a weight that's hard to put into words. They are ordinary photographs, and that is exactly what makes them unbearable. The camera, the money, the dog, the letter, the phones, each one is a fragment of a last day that should have been simple and somehow wasn't. Quick thing before we keep going. If cases like this one stay with you the way they stay with me, please subscribe. This channel is built entirely on these, the cases that were closed but never solved, and there's a new one every week. Okay, let's talk about what the search found and what it didn't. For a long time, the search found nothing. The truck was there. The evidence was there. The dog somehow had survived to be there. But the family themselves had simply dissolved into those mountains. Search teams went out. The rugged country around that road was difficult, thick with brush and trees and ravines, the kind of terrain that can hide a person just a few feet off a trail. Dogs, volunteers, aircraft, and still nothing. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and the Jamison case settled into that terrible limbo that the families in these stories know better than anyone: the not knowing. Were they alive somewhere? Had they been taken? Were they out there in those woods the whole time, just beyond where anyone thought to look? The theories multiplied in that silence, because silence is where theories breed. Some were sure it was murder, tied to the threats, the feuds, the dangerous people on the edges of this family's life. Some thought drugs and money were involved, that the $32,000 was the key, even though it had been left behind. Some believed they had simply gotten lost, or that something had gone wrong out there in the cold and the wild. And some couldn't shake the darker, sadder possibility that whatever was happening inside that family had followed them up the mountain. For nearly 4 years, that's all there was. Questions, and that empty truck, and the woods keeping their secret. And then, in November of 2013, almost 4 years later, the mountains gave them back. Hunters out in that rough country came across human remains. 3 sets of them, badly decomposed, scattered by time and animals and the elements. They were found roughly 2 to 3 miles from where the truck had been abandoned all those years before. It was the Jamison family, Bobby, Sherilynn, and Maddie. They had been out there in those woods the entire time, just far enough off the path, just hidden enough by that terrain that 4 years of searching and weather and seasons had to pass before anyone stumbled onto them. You would think that finding them would finally bring an answer, the end of the mystery, but it did the opposite. Because after nearly 4 years exposed to the wilderness, there was almost nothing left for the medical examiners to work with. No clear wounds to read, no story the bodies could tell. The cause of death for all of them could not be determined. Let that sink in. After all of it, the disappearance, the truck, the cash, the dog, the 4-year wait, the one thing everyone needed, how they actually died, was simply gone, lost to time. The mountains had held them long enough to erase the answer.
So what happened to the Jamison family? Let me lay out the real possibilities and be honest about where each breaks. The first is murder. That someone tied to the threats and feuds around this family killed all 3 of them and left them in those woods. It's a serious theory, supported by the genuine danger that surrounded their lives. But it runs into that $32,000. A killer after money leaves $32,000 in cash in the truck? And there were never charges, never a suspect that stuck. The second is that they died of exposure. That something, an accident, a breakdown, confusion, led them away from the truck on foot, and they got lost or stranded in that rugged country and didn't survive. But why leave the truck at all, with everything in it? Why the dog? The third is the hardest one. That the strain inside the family, the paranoia, the distress, the things they believed were happening to them, ended in tragedy by their own hands. A murder-suicide born of a mind or minds in crisis. It's a possibility investigators could not rule out, and it's one I say carefully and without judgment, because mental anguish is not a horror story. It's a human one. Every theory leaves the same hole. No cause of death. No proof. Just 3 people, a mountain, and a truck full of everything they should have taken with them.
I want to bring it back to them before we finish. The people, not the puzzle. Bois and Sherilynn Jamison were a husband and wife who were struggling with health, with money, with whatever fear or feud or sickness had crept into their lives, and who, despite all of it, got in their truck on an autumn day to go look at a piece of land because some part of them still believed in a better tomorrow. That detail breaks my heart, honestly. They were chasing a fresh start when they vanished. And Maddie, 6 years old, who had no part in any of the adult darkness around her, who was simply a little girl brought along on a family drive into the mountains and who never came home, and whose last photographs are now studied by strangers on the internet, trying to solve the thing that took her. Whatever the truth is, murder, accident, or a private family tragedy, the cruelty of it is that we will almost certainly never know. The bodies can't tell us. The truck can't tell us. The dog, the only living witness, couldn't tell us. And the 3 people who actually know what happened on that mountain have been silent for a very long time. They went looking for a place to start over, and the mountains simply kept them. So, I'll leave it with you the way I always do. What do you believe happened to the Jamison family? Were they murdered by someone tied to the threats around them? Did they die out there by accident, lost in country they didn't know? Or was the answer something quieter and sadder that started long before they ever reached that mountain road? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and on this one, genuinely, I want to know what you think, because almost no one agrees, and the people who could settle it never will. I'm Gravenfield, the cases that were closed but never solved. If you made it this far, you understand exactly what this channel is. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there, and hold the people you love a little closer tonight.